Good morning. Have you ever heard of Leon Patillo? Joke. Okay, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. I get emails sometimes. I wanted to share this one that I received from 2 weeks ago because I think it's important because if one person asks a question, usually someone else has the same question. And I received an email about my last message, and the question was, why do you always use yourself as the example in a message? Which is a fair question. I do that all the time myself, my experiences. Well, there's a few reasons. One is I don't have to remember anything because I've lived that life, so I don't have to learn anything. I absorb new information like granite absorbs water. It takes a while. So I don't have to learn anything about someone else or about their life experience. So that's the first reason why I use myself. Second reason is I know I'm not going to offend myself. And if I do offend myself by using a story from my life, I'll forgive myself. So it just makes that part easier. And third, that's how I was trained. When I was in seminary, our professors in what they called homiletics, which is how to preach, they said always use yourself because you never know how someone will take being an example. So always use yourself. Did everyone get a rose? Everyone? Anyone not get a rose? Joe? Keep your hands up, please. Can you get the flowers and take them to whoever has their hand up? Hands up. That means up. There you go. Who didn't get a rose? Okay. I'll explain the rose later. See, this is part of homiletics. They teach you create tension so that people pay attention, because if you give everything away at the beginning, then no one will have a reason to pay attention. So now you have a rose, and there's a reason for that rose, but I'm not going to tell you the reason until the end. So have you ever heard of what's called a rogue wave out in the ocean? These waves come out of nowhere, and they just go, and if you're in a boat, it's not really a good thing. Have you ever had a rogue wave in your life? Something happens out of nowhere, makes no sense, and you're left thinking, what's going on? I don't understand. Back in 1997, and I don't want to raise of hands of who was born after that, I moved from Southern California to Northern Virginia. And there were a few reasons why. My father had just died in January. My family's based basically in North Carolina. So I wanted to get closer to home. And I wanted to get out of Southern California. In the 80s, Southern California, sweet. 90s, not so much. There was traffic all the time. I mean, midnight there was a traffic jam. All the time. Everybody went to the same place I was going at the same time I was going. So no matter where I went, I was in traffic. And if you know me, you know me and traffic don't get along. And so I was able to get this job. My dream job at the time was working, well, I had two dream jobs at the time. One was working at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and the other one was working at a Navy Primary Standards Lab. It's very difficult to get either position because when someone gets a position in those two laboratories, they never leave. Well, someone left, and I was able to get a job at the Navy Standards Laboratory for the nuclear subfleet for the U.S. and U.K. So that was pretty cool. Not only working on primary standards, but also nukes. this is cool. Um, and so I was out in California, and they told me, okay, here's a map of all the communities where you can look for a place to live. And so I found what I thought was an idyllic sounding town to live in. And it was only 15 miles away from the lab. And this little, I was sure was going to be a beautiful southern town, was named Woodbridge. Woodbridge. Just the sound of that name, Woodbridge. And I was coming from an area known as Riverside County in California, and there's no rivers there, nothing. Just sand, rocks, snakes, and mad people. But I was moving to Woodbridge. Just a thought. I could just see it in my head. Oh, my word. When fall comes, the leaves would gently waft down off the trees. Land and manicured grass, little bunny rabbits running around. You drive on a perfectly paved road, and you come up to a one-lane Woodbridge, and you cover it, and you hear the planks go book, 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 as you drive across it. Oh, the vision. And I was moving out of California, so that was the other good thing. I would never hear a traffic report from a helicopter again. Never again will I hear the, well, there's a jackknife truck on I-5 and whatever else was going wrong. Woodbridge. Oh, it was like a zephyr on a hot day, a cool breeze on a hot day. Oh, I was looking forward to it. And then I arrived in Woodbridge. I specifically chose the apartment that I was going to live in because it said every apartment has a view of the Potomac River. And I was thinking, wow, a historic river. I get to see a river right now. My view is of a carport. And if I look over the carport, I see a building. If I look really far in the distance, I get to see a pile of rocks. And I get to see the majestic, historical Potomac River. Well, I got to Potomac Vista in Woodbridge. It was behind a place called Marumsco Plaza. If you don't know about it, praise the Lord. I did have a vision of a vista towards the Potomac, and the way I found it was I went to my bedroom and opened up the window, held on to something, and leaned way out. And I saw this much of the Potomac. But I saw the Potomac River. When I sat down in my living room, my vista was a retaining wall. This isn't working out too well. My first night in Woodbridge, my idyllic new home, there was gunfire. I found out later that I'd signed a lease in a place where there was a gang war. Well, at least I was used to that. But I figured, you know what? That's fine. At least I won't have traffic. I heard someone say, oops. Yeah, oops. I went up to my new job before I was supposed to start. I just went up to meet people, and it took me an hour and 45 minutes to go 2 exits on 95 North. 2 exits. And I'm going through my radio trying to find a station because everything was programmed for California. And you know what I found? A traffic update from a helicopter. And when I heard that, I was like, good one, God. Good one. My move wasn't panning out how I thought it would. A few months into my tenure, I am sick as a dog. I'm not saying flu sick. I'm saying near-death sick. I can't see. maybe I can see this far in front of me. That's it. Beyond that, it's just blur. One day, I just couldn't go to work because I was so sick. I had no energy. I had absolutely no energy. And I remember that day, right around noon, I sat on the side of my bed, and I remember having a conversation with God. And all I said was, if this is the end, I'm ready to go. Because I was ready to go. And I sat there, and I almost laid down again because I was just so tired. But I was also hungry. And so I got up, walked down to my car. Now, I can't see, right? I can see blur. It's like if you have really bad eyesight and you take your glasses off and everything's just kind of blurry and you can kind of see stuff, but you can't see definition. It's kind of dangerous to drive in that way. But I wanted to go get something to eat. So I got in my car and left. I guess no one noticed that I couldn't see. And I was looking for a McDonald's. And I didn't know where McDonald's was. And the only reason McDonald's was because I knew the menu. I didn't have to look at it. So I'm driving, and I take a wrong turn, and I'm going down this hill and up another hill, and I can't see anything. And I'm just trying to stay on the right side of the road, just the far right, just stay over there. I don't want to hit anybody, but you know what? If I do, oh, well, I can't see. And I come up over the hill, and I see this big blue sign. I think, oh, must be a mall. So I pull in there, I drive in, and it's a hospital. Right to the emergency room. And I park, sort of. I'm like, do I go in? Maybe I should go in. I mean, I'm here. Okay, let's go in. So I walked in into a wall first, but then I finally found the door. And, well, there's these sliding glass doors, but they don't tell you which ones slide. And so there's these two things that look like a door, and I'm walking in, boom, oh, jeez. And so I get in, and I tell them what's going on. It's like I can't sleep, I can't eat, I'm throwing up, I have no energy, I can't see, I don't know what's going on. I said, okay, have a seat. Finally, they take me back. And the doctor comes. I had this Iranian doctor. Just think of the Ayatollah Khomeini as a physician. He had no bedside manner, which actually was good for me. But I had this doctor, he's this Iranian guy, and he said, well, okay, we're going to take some blood, and we're going to figure out what's wrong. I have a hunch, but we'll get blood. So I take blood, and I'm laying there, and it's taking forever. I mean, it must have been at least 15 minutes. And I'm impatient. I just want to go home. I just want to find a Big Mac. That's all. I just want a Big Mac. And I'm laying there, and so they've got a IV thing going in me. They have a heart monitor. My heart's racing at about 150, 170 beats a minute. And so I sit up on the side of the gurney or bed or whatever it was, and I tell the nurse, take this out of me. I'm going home. And the nurse stopped and said, you have to wait for the doctor. I said, no, I don't. I know my rights. I can go home whenever I want. The doctor came around the corner right as I said, want, and he said, lay down and shut up. You're going nowhere. Aye, aye, sir. And he said, you should be dead. I said, why do you say that? And he said, see, this is your blood work. And he showed me the blood work. He said, you see this? And he's pounding this piece of paper. You see this? It says potassium. What's the number? What's the number beside your potassium? It's 0. We can't detect potassium in your body. You need potassium for your heart to beat. Why is your heart beating? I don't know. To get to the other side? I don't know. He said, look at this. And I couldn't see anything because I was blind. Look at this. You see this? This is blood glucose. You see that number? No. 799. You should be in a coma. Lay down, shut up, you're going nowhere. So as they were preparing, they were getting some insulin to go in my little bag of horrors. And they took blood again, and my blood sugar had actually risen to 1,200 in about half an hour. And the doctor's like, how are you alive? How are you coherent? How are you talking to me? You shouldn't be doing this. You should be in a coma. He said, I've never seen someone with blood sugar this high walk into an emergency room. And I looked at it and I said, so it's some kind of record? All right. There you go. Leave it to me. A record. So I was admitted. They warned me. They said, we're going to give you a headache that you've never experienced before because we're going to squeeze the insulin into your body to drop your blood sugar, and that's going to give you a major headache. And I was like, yeah, sure. Wow. It was a headache. And so I was put in ICU, and they still weren't sure why I was alive because every blood test they did like 42 tests. Every test I had was abnormal. They tested me 3 times for potassium and never found potassium in my body. And I don't know if you need it for you. He said I needed it for my heart to beat. My heart was beating, so I don't know. Maybe I'm different. I don't know. But I get up in my room, and they just, after the 3rd time, and they confirmed it 3 times with 3 different lab technicians that I had no detectable potassium. They put a potassium drip in me, right here. You know what that felt like? You take an ice pick and go, and twist it. And then heat up the ice pick and do it again. Horrible feeling. Shut up, you should be dead. My first night there, I'm laying there, this thing beside me rings. This is how messed up my brain was. And I looked at it, and there was a little light on it flashing with the ring. It would and the light would come on, then go off, and like it's a phone. And I'm looking at it, wondering what that is. I couldn't operate a phone. Now, not like a cell phone for you young people. It's a phone that had a wire that went into the wall. And it had a little dash pad on the front, a little push button thing on the front. But I couldn't figure out how to operate this thing. I was looking at it. And the nurse came in. I was just looking at this thing. I must have had a Gomer Pyle look on my face. Because I'm watching this thing. And so the nurse picks it up and says, say hello. Hello? And it was my boss. He was searching for me. And I didn't know what to do with the phone after I was done, so I just put it down by my side. And the nurse was talking to me saying, you're lucky. You're the talk of the hospital right now. You should be dead. It's like, yeah, I got that. I understand that. But I don't understand why. And he said, well, the doctor's coming in, and we'll figure it all out for you. So the doctor came in, Mr. Bedside Manner himself, and he said, well, how long have you been a type 1 diabetic? And why are you neglecting it? I said, I've never been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. He said, well, you are a type 1 diabetic. You are producing no insulin. And then he went on to explain, how your pancreas, these things called islets of Langerhans, have beta cells and they produce insulin, and mine had died. They ceased production. I guess they went on strike. And, islets of Langerhans, it sounds like a place in Norway, where you go on vacation. I'm going to the islets of Langerhans. And I'm laying there thinking, how did I catch diabetes? And he said, You don't catch diabetes. You are born with it. I said, but what was it, 33 at the time. I've never had diabetes. Never. Well, who in your family has it? Nobody. Now, cancer and heart disease, yeah, we're good with that, but not diabetes. And he's looking, and he said, well, I guess it was your bad luck to get juvenile diabetes as a 33-year-old. You're going to inject insulin the rest of your life. You're going to be pricking your finger 4 times a day at least. You'll be taking insulin at least twice a day. You'll be taking at least 2 types of insulin twice a day for the rest of your life. Oh, and as an added bonus, just know that you won't really feel great the rest of your life. Thanks, Doc. And I'm laying there. He leaves. I'm just laying there. It must have been about 8:30, 9 o'clock, maybe later. And I'm not really whining. I'm just, why is this happening? You ever been that way? What is going on in my life? I didn't think I was in open rebellion to God, but I didn't know why. Why is this happening to me, God? Why? And then I had a visitor come in, and I quickly found out that I surmised he was the chaplain, because we started talking about things. He asked me if I'd graduated college. I said, yeah, I graduated from Liberty. Had a dual major of abnormal psych and church ministries. And he said, well, are you thinking about being a pastor? I said, no, not really. I was thinking about going to seminary and getting my doctorate and teaching. But I'm open to be, I was open to be anything. But since my dad died and now this, I'm not sure I can go that route. And we talked a little bit more. He went to the foot of my bed, and he looked almost like, have you ever someone look almost through you? And he looked at me, and he said, Patrick, God has a call on your life. Don't let this disease stop you from answering that call, because he'll take care of you when you answer. And he left, and Nurse Ratchet came back in, and they took blood every hour. And she came back in, was taking blood, and I said, well, what's the name of the guy that was just in here? Because I'd like to send him a note just saying thank you. She said, I don't know, I'll go check. And then 30 minutes later or so, she comes back and said, there hasn't been anyone in your room. I said, no, there was someone in my room. Maybe they just came in through a different entrance. You just didn't see him. That's fine. He said, no, you don't understand. I checked. The chaplain is on call, but he's not on the premises. I said, so who was it, a doctor? He goes, no, doctors sign in. You're in intensive care. People just can't wander into your room. I said, well, someone wandered into my room because I had a good 15-minute conversation with this someone. And she said, sir, your brain chemistry is still messed up. It was probably an hallucination. And I kind of sat up. I said, ma'am, I've had hallucinations before. I know what they are. This wasn't that. And she said, well, I don't have an answer for you, but nobody's been in your room except you. And she reached down and she picked up a hardcover Bible that was opened, and she handed it to me. So here you go. And it was opened. My eyes went down to this verse. Now, it was NIV, so it's not going to be exactly the same. And I looked at this verse. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers. For by this, some have entertained angels without knowing it. turn with me to 2 Corinthians chapter 12. Okay, that's out of the way. We're going to be doing 4 verses this week about Paul's thorn in his flesh. And we're just going to go through each verse and basically just try to understand. Well, you see my points up there. And then try to figure out how this applies to us. How do we take this issue in Paul's life and apply it to our lives? Now, 2 Corinthians was written by Paul in defense of his apostleship. There was these guys, they were known as super apostles, that had infiltrated the church at Corinth and were undermining the authority of the Apostle Paul. These guys would have signs and wonders and all this stuff following them. And so Paul was having to defend his apostleship. These were basically legalists, and if you have ever experienced a legalist, you'll know they always have some kind of whiz-bang thing going on, why they're the best and why they're charismatic and why they're this and why they're that. But they enslave the church. They enslave people with their doctrine from hell. And so Paul in 2 Corinthians is defending not only his apostleship, but also what he has taught. And here in chapter 12, we see it starting in verse 7, he says, because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations. Back up to verse 2. And these are some of the revelations Paul is talking about. He says, I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago, whether in body or not, I don't know, such a man was caught up to the third heaven. And I know how such a man, whether body or not, God knows, was caught up to paradise and heard inexpressible words which a man is not permitted to speak. Now, this is Paul's way of talking about himself without talking about himself. So it's pretty much universally interpreted that Paul is talking about his experience 14 years prior of being caught up to the third heaven. Now, third heaven. Pump the brakes. Mormons will say there's 3 levels of heaven, or 3 separate heavens. You have the celestial kingdom, which I believe is the lowest, then terrestrial, which is the second. I get those 2 mixed up, which one's first, which one's second. And then you have the celestial kingdom. The celestial kingdom is the top dog kingdom. And that's where you have to get married in the temple and have like 4 million kids and all that. And actually, I shouldn't talk about number of kids, but you have all this, and you abide by all the Mormon stuff, and then you become a god of your own world, and you have spirit babies with your multiple wives, and you go do your own thing. This is not that. The third heaven was an expression in the ancient Near East to convey where God lives. Regardless of who God was to that particular people group, it was just a way of expressing this is the abode of God. So the first heaven would be considered our atmosphere that surrounds the earth. That's the first heaven. The second heaven would be what you see, what we call outer space. And then the third heaven is wherever God's seated and whoever your God is, wherever he's seated. That's the third heaven. That's the abode of God. So what Paul is saying here is, look, I was caught up to paradise. I was caught up to heaven. I was in the actual presence of God. Can you imagine what that would be like as a human? And he says, I heard inexpressible words, which a man is not permitted to speak. And that's all he says. It kind of contradicts things today of, 5 minutes in heaven, or 30 minutes in heaven, or 10 minutes in hell, or this guy down in Louisiana, Jesse Duplantis, rode a train to heaven. There's another person, I don't know if you heard of this person, Kat Kerr. She rides a trolley car to heaven every day. And heaven, according to her, the houses are made out of candy. And you can eat your house and it grows right back. The Holy Spirit is the color blue. She also says it snows in heaven. There's Christmas Town or Christmasville or Christmas something. Santa Claus lives there. The snow is alive. So if you make a snowman, guess what? Frosty the Snowman. Yeah. It's alive. So, I mean, okay, I don't believe any of that's true. Paul, the apostle, said he can't even say what he heard. I believe this is true. This revelation. And probably he's referring to being instructed by the resurrected Christ. All these revelations that Paul had, because of them, for this reason, having these great big revelations, to keep me from exalting myself, there was given me a thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me, to keep me from exalting myself. So the first point you'll see up there, what is a thorn? So what's a thorn? The first thing that jumped in my mind when I saw this thorn was like the big thorns that were placed on Jesus' head. These big Judean thorns that just crunched into and went into the skull, caused all kinds of bleeding. But that's not the word here. The word here is scallops, and it's more of in the line of a splinter or a piece of wood, small, that penetrates your body. It's a foreign body that penetrates your body and causes an infirmity. Metaphorically, Paul's using it here as a limiting thing or a disability. Now, the fact that he says thorn in the flesh does not necessarily mean it was some sort of physical disability, because it's just an expression. So it could have been something physical. People say Paul had trouble with his eyes. Some say Paul was bald. I don't know how that's a disability, but if it is, I'm in trouble. Some say Paul had a club foot and couldn't walk quite correctly, or that he was hunched over. I don't know. But it seems that Paul is indicating here that this thorn, this disability, was to keep him from exalting himself, from getting puffed up with pride. It was to keep him humble. And Paul is basically saying this messenger of Satan, now look at that, a messenger of Satan. So we start to see there's two purposes going on here. Satan has his purpose with sending a messenger to torment Paul. And that word torment is sometimes buffet. The idea is getting the snot beat out of you. I mean, it's like getting boom, pound, not like, no, it's like Mike Tyson in his prime, pounding on you. And what Paul is saying is, Satan, this messenger came from Satan, and I believe it's pretty easy to figure out Satan's motive: to discourage Paul, to stop Paul, to keep him from doing what God's called him to do. But what does Paul say? It's to keep him from exalting myself. Who is the greatest advocate for humility? Who's our example for humility? Christ. So we see here there's one purpose from hell for these thorns. There's another purpose from heaven, from God. Now, I don't want to imply that every illness, every sickness is a direct result of demonic activity. It is, but it isn't. Illness is part of the fall, is natural consequence of the fall of mankind and our imperfections. And the farther we get away from Eden, the more we break down. However, I do believe there are times and I believe it happens more than conservatives like me want to admit, that Satan mounts an attack. Now, either through God ordaining that attack to happen, or his acquiescence to Satan to allow him to attack. I'm not going to get in that theological debate. However it happens, it has to pass through the throne of God before it gets to us. And that's what I think these thorns are. These attacks on Christians to make us or to encourage us, discourage us from doing what God's called us to do. And so it doesn't matter if it's physical, could be psychological, could be emotional, could be spiritual. Whatever your weakness is, whatever that little thing is that Satan can get in there and start prying you away and getting in between you and a vibrant friendship with God, he's going to do it. He'll exploit it. And it's not like God's on the sideline saying, oh, well, that's just the devil. No, God's saying, yeah, go ahead. Go right ahead. Remember Job? How about Joseph? Paul? Which one stopped doing what they should do? So a thorn in the flesh, is some sort of disability delivered by Satan or one of his minions, but has a divine purpose to it. Concerning this, the thorn, I implored the Lord 3 times that it might leave me. So where do I turn when I get a thorn? Do I turn to myself? Do I turn to my friend and say, oh, I got this problem. Can you help me? What did Paul do? He turned to the Lord. He turned to the one that could do something. And Scripture says that he implored the Lord 3 times. Sometimes we're shamed into asking for healing. You shouldn't do that. If your faith is strong enough, you'll just, soldier on. I don't think there's any shame in asking God to heal you if you have some debilitating illness. I don't think there's a problem. Paul did it 3 times. And this idea of imploring, it's not, hey, God, would you take care of this? Imagine on his knees, God, please, Lord, take this thorn away. Please take this thorn away. Begging. His heart cry. Take it away. Not just 1 time did he do this. Not just 2 times. 3 times. Begging God. Take it away. Please. Only you can relieve this. Ever been there? Whether it's physical, maybe financial, emotional. Please, God, take this away. And he has said to me, the Lord has said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness. After I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, I don't remember ever asking God to take it away. Not because I'm some spiritual giant, probably I just didn't do it because I just didn't think about it. And it took about a year, not quite a year, maybe 8 months until I got the insulin kind of right and my eating habits right. so that my blood sugar would stay relatively okay. Early on, I would have these things called low blood sugar episodes. They're freaky. You just all of a sudden get sick, and you turn, I mean, I'm white, but I mean, I'm talking like almost invisible white. All the blood drains out of you, and you're like, ugh. And so you have to have these tablets with you, glucose tablets, and you have to start eating these. There's sugar. And I always, before I knew people that were diabetic, and I always thought, man, they get to eat candy bars whenever they want. And actually having it, no, that isn't a cool thing to have to do. But after about 8-9 months of having this and checking my blood 4 or 5 times a day and injecting insulin and learning to eat healthily, which is a challenge for me, things were kind of normal, and my doctor cleared me to start exercising more. So I joined a gym. It was a small gym, and a weightlifter was there, and he said, look, you can really do something here. You've got some good structure, and we'll challenge you, and here's a diet for you to follow. I said, well, I'm diabetic. He said, well, this will work perfectly for you then. And so I went on this diet that he had, and it did work really well. One day in the summer of 1998, so a little over a year, I finally decided that I would go to seminary in spite of the diabetes. And so I went up to Capital Bible Seminary in Lanham, and they had a preview night, and I went there, and I sat in on a class. It was exegesis in Luke. And that's exegesis where you translate the Greek into English. And I'm looking at this guy, a really nice guy I sat next to, was showing me in his Greek New Testament. I don't know what that is. It's Greek. I'm just sitting here just listening. And so but it was interesting to me. And I had to leave right after that class because I had to go get more insulin. I was down to my last few shots. And so I told not the dean, but whoever's in charge of enrollment, I said, look, I have to go because I'm diabetic. I need to go get insulin. But I promise I'll apply, and I'll start the ball rolling to get my degree stuff over here. And he said, okay. And he wrote on my application, I qualified for a waiver of the application fee, which was very nice of him. And so I went out to my car in the parking lot, I sat down, and this is one of the limiting things about type 1 diabetes is you can't just do things. Everything has to be planned. And so whenever I knew I was going to be out late, I always had to pack a sandwich because I would have to take my insulin at prescribed intervals. And so I'm out there in my car, and I'm stabbing myself and shooting insulin in my belly, and I was getting ready to eat the sandwich I had. And I stopped, and the needle was still like bobbing here. And I remember my prayer. All I said was, God, please help me. I don't know how I will do this with this disease. That was it. That's all I prayed. Got my sandwich, started eating, drove home. Or drove to the pharmacy. About a month after that, I was working out, and something happened that, again, kind of rocked my world. Again, another roadway. But Paul says in verse 9 that God said no. My grace, his grace, is sufficient. Have you ever had God say no to you? Have you ever had God say, nah, I'm not going to do that. Not going to heal you. Not going to take away whatever it is that's irritating you. I'm not going to do that which you've asked me to do. I'm not going to do it. Because my grace that I'm giving you is more than enough to take care of it and to get you through this time. basically, like my doctor had told me, sit down and shut up, but much nicer. What is God teaching? Reliance. Not on self, not on circumstances, but on Him. His grace is sufficient. So how do we react? How should we react when God says no? Because God does say no. Most gladly, therefore, I will rather boast about my weaknesses so the power of Christ may dwell in me. Wow. I will rather boast about my weaknesses. Paul drew attention to his weaknesses. Paul didn't hide them. Paul didn't try to paper over them. He didn't try to act like they didn't exist. Personally, I think Paul accentuated those weaknesses. He wanted people to see that he was weak. And why? So that the power of Christ would be evident. There's a Japanese custom. I learned this back in the 80s. We hosted some Japanese students, and their head cheese, whatever they call him, whoever he was, his name was Mori. And he gave us a set of ceramic cups, and every one of them had been broken. And he was telling us the story of the broken cup. And he said, if you notice, you see we didn't cover up the break. We highlighted it with gold. And I was like, yeah, why? Because it's just the opposite here. We want to make it look perfect. He said, but it's not perfect. We embrace the break. It improves the character of the cup. Paul embraced his weakness, whatever that weakness was, and relied on God's promise, not his circumstances. My grace is sufficient. My grace, God's grace, is sufficient for you. For you. For all y'all. No matter what it is. No matter what mountain it is you're climbing. No matter what thorn is in your side. God's grace is sufficient. Ask for healing. I'm good with that. But if God says no, be good with that. Verse 10, therefore, I am well content with weaknesses, with insults, with distresses, with persecutions, with difficulties, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Paul found purpose and contentment, not in his circumstance, not in his condition, but in God's grace. This word, content, boy, I hate to disagree with NASB, but I'm going to disagree with them again. I think we could tease out a little bit more colorful translation here. Yeah, it means content, but content to me just kind of seems, it's the Greek word eudoko, or eudokeo. And what it means is almost to revel, almost to celebrate. It's more than just being content, although it is that. It's more than that. It's not just, okay, I have a limiting weakness. It's, yeah, I got a limiting weakness. The attitude is one of almost joyful celebration of that condition. Joyful celebration of a weakness. How many of us do that? Yeah, I got a back fusion. Yeah. Yeah, type 1 diabetes. Whoa. And not just with the weakness. Look at everything. Not only my weaknesses, but yeah, insult me. Come on, bring it on. How many of us like to be insulted? I just got insulted this past week at work. I didn't like it. It distresses. Boy, there's something that's appropriate for this day, isn't it? We live in distressing times. Finances, inflation, I don't care what they say, inflation stinks. Just the cultural rot that we see. What happened yesterday? I don't care what you think of Donald Trump. Don't assassinate him. He bears the image of God. Content with all these. That is our goal, is to be content in spite of our circumstances. So I'm working out in the gym. August 1998. I'm doing shoulder press. I'm pressing, I think I had to weight up to like 8,000 pounds. It's a story, I'll say what I want, okay? I got the pulpit. There you go. And I'm halfway up with my 500th rep, and I lose control. I drop the weight, and I keel over. I can hear, I can see, I cannot talk. I can't move. The owner of the gym runs over to me. What's wrong? Slapping me on, what's wrong? I can't talk. Did I just have a stroke? And he's trying to find my heartbeat here, and he's choking me because he doesn't know how to find a pulse here. He's panicking, and so they call 911, and they put me in the meat wagon, send me over to the same hospital where I was diagnosed with diabetes. And they get me in there, and it's not my fave doctor wasn't there. Someone else was. And so they found my record, and, oh, geez, this guy's diabetic. He's probably low blood sugar. And so they give me some glucose, and I perk right up. And they had checked my glucose, and it was like 30 or something. It was crazy low. And the doctor said, well, how long have you been type 1? I said, over a year. He said, well, have you had trouble with your insulin or something? I was like, no. I've been working out for months. I mean, look, I've been working out for months. I got this dialed in. I know what I'm doing. I had 2 pieces of pizza before I went to work out, which I really shouldn't have had, but since I was working out, the pizza would keep my blood sugar high. What's going on, Doc? Every time I come to this hospital, I get bad news. He said, well, I don't know. You need to go see your primary care. And so I did, and I spoke with her, and she was an expert in diabetes, been around forever and a day. And I said, I don't know what's going on, but this is not very encouraging. I haven't had this problem since I started over a year ago. And now here it is again. What's going wrong? And she said, well, let's run blood work and we'll see. And so she ran the same tests that were run originally in the hospital so we could compare numbers and see what is going wacky. About a week later, she calls me in to discuss the results of the test. And she's showing me these 2 pages of blood work. And she says, see this? This is normal, this is normal, this is normal, this is normal. This is normal, this is normal, this is, everything was normal. I said, so what's the problem? She said, well, everything's normal. That's the problem. What? She said, look at this test right here. Here it was in July of June of 1997. And she circled it. I don't remember the name of the test, but it was 0. Was the value 0. I said, okay, it's 0. Now look over here, and it was whatever number it was. But it was within the range that it should have been. I'm like, okay, what's that? And she said, well, that's an indirect measurement of how much insulin your body produces. I said, okay, what are you saying? And she looked at me and said, well, I don't know why. I don't have an answer for you. But you're no longer a type 1 diabetic. Excuse me? That's not supposed to happen. And she looked at me and said, she said to me, I've never seen this happen in my career. And I said, so how does that happen? And she looked at me and she said, I have no scientific reason why, but I think I understand why. And she wasn't a doctor for that minute. She looked at me and said, God voted no. I never asked God to heal me. I walked down to my car. I sat down. I must have sat for 15 minutes. Stunned. What do you do? The only thing I could get out of my mouth was thank you. I didn't know what to say. I was perfectly content with injecting insulin the rest of my life. If you know me, you know I'm a extraordinarily conservative when it comes to theology. I prefer written word over experience. 10 times out of 10, I'll say if it's not in Scripture, I don't care what your experience is. I'm not going to tell you your experience is wrong. I'm just going to say, if it's not here, then you should question it. As I was sitting there processing all this, I heard, I took care of you when you answered my call. I looked around. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't like this. And it wasn't like someone yelling. It was just this deep voice, you know, Barry White, real deep, or the Don Cornelius off Soul Train. Really deep voice. And I whipped around. I was looking around. Did I just hear that? I don't know if I actually heard a voice or not. I think I did. I don't know. What I know, I once was a type 1 diabetic, and now I'm not. I learned a very important lesson that year of injecting insulin. I learned a very important lesson when I committed to go to seminary. I learned that, and I'm going to use we here, but I learned this, that we really don't believe that God's grace is sufficient until we recognize or realize that we are insufficient. And we really can't receive the sufficiency of God's grace until we know our own insufficiency. So what's up with the rose? Everyone got the rose? These came from Bogota, Colombia. When I realized, I ordered them online last week, and when I realized they were coming from Bogota, I was like, uh-oh. There's a product that comes out of Bogota that's not a rose. And I was a little worried about it getting through customs and all that. Well, it got through fine and got here. If you'll notice on your rose, there are little places where the thorns used to be. And maybe yours still has a thorn or two. And this is kind of like life. Kind of like our lives. If we focus our concentration on avoiding the thorns so we don't get stuck and it doesn't hurt, we never see the beauty of the flower. We can never appreciate the beauty of a rose if all we're worried about are the thorns. You're going to have thorns in your life. I am convinced every one of us who names the name of Christ, who stands for Christ, who lives a life worthy of the calling of Christ, will endure a thorny attack from Satan. But we should embrace that because there is beauty in the thorn, not in itself, but in its purpose. Paul tells us that our overarching purpose in life is to be conformed to the likeness of the image of Christ. Romans 8, Paul writes again, all things work together for good for those who love the Lord and are called according to his purposes. James 1, consider it pure joy when you encounter various trials, when you encounter your thorns. Consider it pure joy. You may not have the same experience I've had. And these days, let me tell you, I'm not a type 1 diabetic. But I take 14, 15 medications every day. I've got things wrong with me I didn't know existed. My family embarked on a hard journey a few years ago. Much more difficult than I ever thought it would be. And it's tearing at us. And we're attacked. And we're bludgeoned. Satan's come after us. Satan's coming after you. But I don't care anymore. I don't care why we suffer. At least from Satan's point of view. Because I know God's grace is sufficient. Whether it's physical, emotional, financial, I don't care what the attack is. God's grace is sufficient for you, for us. So if I may encourage you to go forward in the power of his grace. Let's pray. Father, I don't know how to say thank you for the blessing and the beauty of the thorns in my life. Father, I do ask that for each of us here, for me, that we learn to revel in our weaknesses, that we learn to celebrate where we just can't do. And we learn to do that because it's for your sake, for your glory. Your grace poured out on us so that when these attacks come, and Satan has his purpose to discourage us living for you, and yet, by relying on your grace, we demonstrate your power. Help us all, Father, as we go through the next week, as we struggle with just the thorns of life. May all that we do, all that we say, bring glory to you. We ask this in Jesus' name.